All right. Well, welcome so much, Dana. It is so good to have you here. People have been
Mhm.
asking for me to interview you and ask you a bunch of questions. So tell me or tell everybody all about you and where you're from and your whole deal, just in case they don't know.
I am a decluttering expert, but it took me a long time to say that. And if you would have told me 15 years ago that I would call myself that, I would have laughed in your face and said you were bananas. I started out, I just wanted to be a writer. And so I started writing on a blog, what I thought was a temporary blog, trying to get my own house under control because my house was a disaster. And I was trying to get my house figured out so I could, feel justified and free up the time to actually write about things I felt qualified to write about. And here we are 14 years later, and this is what I write and teach for a living because I learned that the struggles that I experienced, the bewilderment over the state of my home, that I was not the only person that felt that way. I had thought I was the only person out there because it looked like this was easy for the rest of the entire world and that I was the only one who struggled the way that I did. So it took me for a long time. I was just working on my own house, writing about what I was doing online. And people were asking, can you teach us what to do? And I would say, why would you want to learn from me? That doesn't make any sense. And so I didn't teach for a long time until I realized, oh, I can't tell anybody how to have a perfect house. Like that is not what I do, but I can tell you how to go from completely overwhelmed and bewildered to, oh, that's how you do this. Like anyway, so that's basically what I do for a living. I have a podcast, YouTube, all that kind of stuff.
That's awesome. And you've written a couple of books.
I have. Yeah, I have 3 books out at this time. I just turned in my manuscript for my next book, and that's the beginning of a 4-book contract. So I started all this because I wanted to be a writer, and that is the primary thing that I do is write books.
I love that. And I like you can always tell what somebody likes most when they say that. Like that is the primary thing I do because I
Yes.
know you do YouTube and the podcast. Like your podcast, I think I just saw you had over 300 or 400, like so many
Yes.
episodes.
Yes, I think
Yeah.
I'm at 408 this week, which is
Yeah.
10 years. I've been doing it for more than 10 years.
Yes,
Like
that
before
is
podcasts were really even a thing that much,
yeah.
So,
Yeah, that is amazing. I love that. So before you started decluttering, what
mhm.
sort of was it that really tipped the scales for you and just made you say like, I got to do something about this?
So really it was that I wanted to be a writer. I found out what blogs were and
Mm.
I thought, okay, that's an easy entry way to start doing this thing I want to do. But my house weighed on me because I couldn't function in it. I also wanted to write about things like motherhood, which at the time I thought that was, original. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I know that we're in a different place in history now, and that is something that, a lot of people write about, but that's what I wanted to write about. And I couldn't because I felt like even if I write things that are good and true about this thing I'm passionate about, I would live in fear that someone would find out what my house looked like. And I would fear that if they found out, they would throw out all the good and true things that I had said because good or bad, right or wrong, there is this, it's like your house feels like your report card, right? As a
Mhm.
mom. So
Yeah.
I was failing. I had always, always, always struggled with my house. And when I say struggled, I don't just mean, oh, it was messy, more often than I wanted. No, I mean, it was like I was embarrassed to open my front door. I would put off letting people inside. I would host events, but it would take me 2 weeks to get ready, right? Like I would have to declutter first, which at the time was just shoving everything in the primary bedroom so I could lock the door, right? And then I would spend the second week cleaning because there had been stuff everywhere and I hadn't been able to clean, so it was a real challenge. I actually always assumed that I needed to get organized because that's what we think, right? You look around at the mess and you think, oh, I've got to get organized. I thought I was giving up by saying I'm just going to declutter first. That's how bad this is. I'm going to have to just not even worry about getting organized. I'm just going to declutter. But when I did that, that's when my house started to change. And so it was that rock bottom of, I don't even know what to do. That's how bad it is. I can't even do this. I'm just going to start getting rid of stuff. And that ultimately is the thing that achieved what I had always wanted when I was thinking I needed to get organized.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And it's funny you say about getting ready for events because that's what we used to do. And I think that it's things like that that actually make the problem so much worse because you take these things and I would say almost, 1 out of 20 things are something you actually use. You throw it in a drawer or a box or whatever and just shove it around your house. And then
Mhm.
it never gets dealt with. And you
Exactly.
now have clutter randomly in all over different places of the house. You explained that so well. Wow. Yeah. Clutter, it's just once you take care of that, it's so much easier to take care of your house.
Right. And I, I didn't understand why it was so hard. I also didn't understand what other people were doing. And like, the phrase people use of, well, a place for everything and everything in its place. That is true, but it was so irritating to me when someone would say that, like, well, that's the simple solution, a place for everything and everything in its place. And I was like, but I have all this stuff that doesn't have a place. And
Yeah.
like, I put things away that I know where they go, and then everything's full, and I still have all this other stuff. And I wasn't registering that the problem was too much stuff. That was actually my problem.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And don't you think it's because you and I were a similar age that we grew up in an era where it was just all about getting more and more stuff in abundance, like the 80s and going into the 90s. Like minimalism, decluttering didn't even exist, really. It was always about organizing,
Well,
right?
I was telling my daughter the other day, I said, something about, I remember my first year of teaching, and well, teaching in the US. And I was, we were having a conversation at lunch as the teachers, and somebody said, did you know that Sonic takes credit cards now? And we were all like, what? And my daughter was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, grocery stores didn't take credit cards.
Yeah.
Fast food didn't take credit cards. Like, it was just not a thing. And so this credit card immediate access, there's no need to wait. That just means that it's like, oh, I want something, I can get it. Like, instead of building up, and my issue was not even credit cards, because we tried to stay away from those. My issue was garage sales, right? Like,
Mm.
but I think it was because of that mentality of, wow, all these other people are getting all the stuff that they need for their house and they make it look amazing, and oh, I've got the solution. I'm going to go to garage sales and get it for pennies on the dollar. And I would just bring in and bring in and bring in without ever thinking, oh, this is actually the reason that it looks so bad, is because I have more stuff than I can possibly have spaces for or handle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because my grandma, maybe like 5 years ago, she actually, I didn't even know you could still do this, but she actually put a duvet comforter set on layaway at a store. And that's what people used to do. And really, if you think about it, that is actually how we should plan to buy things. I think
Yes.
like, once people start to think, okay, I'm going to declutter, like a big part of it is like what we're bringing into the house and how we're bringing it in. And you make a good point about the credit cards. It's so easy to bring things in, which, can create a financial issue in and of itself, but also, whenever I buy anything, I just bought one of those Ninja Creamy ice cream things.
Mhm.
And I was like, I know exactly where I'm putting it. Although I'm going to be honest with you, we have barely used it, but I'm going to see if it makes it in summer. But if not, it's gone. But I knew, I was like, where's this going to go? This is an appliance. But so I wasn't like that before. It was just
Mhm.
like buy it and find a spot. And then a bunch of things were all over the counter and
Yes.
in boxes and this and that. And yeah, like, times have changed so much. It used to be you planned for everything.
Right. Right. I have friends that got married at the same time that my husband and I got married. And I had lived overseas for a couple of years before we got married. And so my stuff was in a storage unit. My husband uh, was already established in an apartment when we got married. Then we got a lot of wedding gifts. And so we had all this stuff. And I had this mentality of, well, I don't know, because we're not in our final home. I don't know what I'm going to need. So I might as well keep it all. So we had we had wasn't really a 2-bedroom apartment, but it was like called a 1-bedroom and a study. And that study was stacked to the ceiling with boxes of stuff that I was just like, well, I don't know yet. I don't know yet what I need. So I'm going to have it. Well, these friends who got married at the same time, I remember going to their house and laying on the floor because they didn't have a couch yet. And then like when they got a couch, it was a very purposeful decision of, we found the exact couch that we want and we're going to get this. And so it was just such a bizarre thing to me at the time. I was like, but don't you need this? And don't you need this? And don't you need this? And I'm like, well, we'll get it eventually. And looking back, I think we were perfectly fine sitting on the floor. Now I'm 50 now and I wouldn't want to, but at the time I could totally, you know what I mean? Like it was fine. And looking at how they've built their house, as opposed to, I had to get rid of so much stuff to get my house to, where I wanted it to be. And just the burden that was, it's such a different mentality. And I admire their way of going about that.
Yeah, that's unique. I feel like a lot of the younger generation right now, generations, maybe the millennials or the younger millennials and even younger than that, they seem less, I feel like there was just a coming out of the era of, like I really feel like the 80s was just all about just like consumption, right? Yeah. So your friend was unique.
Yeah, no, it was very strange to me, but I admire it so much looking at how it all played out. Like that was the way to go.
Yeah, I love that. So you have such a great many great strategies, and people absolutely love them. And so what is the key to decluttering without making a bigger mess? Because this is so often people will, and I think that this is what throws a lot of people off, is they say, I'm going to declutter, and then it just becomes so much worse. And then that just puts them off of wanting to declutter in the first place.
Right. And people accept it as fact, right? Like they say, oh, well, it has to get worse before it gets better. And I thought that too, because I thought that the way to declutter was what most people tell you to do, which is to pull everything out of the space and then only put back what you want. Well, I would pull everything out of the space and think, wow, that looks amazing, completely empty. And then I would turn around and there were the piles of things on the counter or on the floor or in the hallway. And I would just shut down because it was so overwhelming. Or I would put back what I wanted in that space. And then I would think, well, but I still have all this other stuff. Like, what do I do with that? So it just would keep me from decluttering, because I would think, okay, well, last time I tried, boy, the house was completely messed up for 3 weeks after I did that. So I don't want to do it. I don't want to declutter unless I know for sure I'm going to have enough time. So how much time do I think I'll need? Which I'd never been successful. So I never knew. Right. So I'm like, I probably need a full day for that. Okay. When am I going to have a full day to actually spend? You know what? Actually, I probably need a whole weekend. I need to send the kids off to my mom's house. You know what? Actually, I should probably wait for Christmas break, and that whole week there, I'm going to really, well, guess what I didn't want to do over Christmas break, right? And so I just kept putting it off and putting it off. Meanwhile, it grew more overwhelming, and then I would estimate even more time. So then it just was this never ending cycle. So because my house was so bad and every space was overwhelming, I had to come up with a way to make progress and only progress. And so that's where my no mess decluttering process, that's where that was born, right? Is I'm like, so what I do, basically the boiled down version of it is one item at a time, final decision by final decision, and acting on that final decision. Mm-hmm. Okay. And we count progress as success as opposed to finishing as success. Right. And when I shifted into saying I can spend any amount of time, whether it's 5 hours or 5 minutes, or I thought I had 5 minutes and I only had 2. As long as I'm following the no mess process where I am acting on each final decision and I'm not doing anything where I set it aside for later or put it in a box for later or make a pile, as long as I'm only following this progress and only progress method, I don't have to know how much time I have, which means I can get started, or I can do a little here and there and make real actual progress. And that's when my house started to change, right? Instead of just having this big future picture of what I want it to look like, I was like, what can I do right now that will make an actual impact that's not backtrackable, that's not just going to fall back into what
Yeah.
it was before.
Oh my gosh. I love that. So and I like that it's like a final decision.
Mm-hmm.
Like so often. And I feel like this is where a lot of people get stuck. And not just final decision, but like trying to make a decision relatively quickly, because some people they really hum and haw and then they're like, "Okay, like I can't move on," and they're spending like 10 minutes trying to decide what to do and then they end up keeping it.
Right. Which is so it can be overwhelming for someone who's like, I can't make final decisions, right? But the
Yeah.
process leads you through that. So there's 5 steps, and the first 3 steps are literally decision free. Okay. So it's like just taking action on the things that are obvious that you already know. It's the trash, get the trash out of there, move the easy stuff out, which is stuff that does have a home somewhere else. Go take it there now. And, go ahead and pull out anything that's an obvious donation that you don't have to think about. So trash, sometimes people say, oh, well, I don't know what's trash. I'm like, well, then that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about actual decision free. Oh yeah, of course. Even, no, like you're not angsty over it, right? And so we make progress with those first 3 steps, which builds some momentum and makes the space have less in it and be less overwhelming. And then we move into the actual decision steps. But even those, my decluttering questions, my first one is, if I needed this item, where would I look for it first? I am not asking myself how I feel about it. I'm not asking myself to predict the future about when I might need it, or I'm not asking myself if it's valuable or does it mean something. I'm literally asking, where would I look for this first? There's no emotions there, right? It is instinct based. And then I take it to that space and I acknowledge, is there room for it here? Is there a place for it? If there's not, then am I willing to get rid of something else in here in order to make the space for it? And then it becomes I'm not asking, does this mechanical pencil have value? I'm asking, is there room for this mechanical pencil in the place where I would look for it? Oh, no, there's not, because there's 14 other mechanical pencils in there. Or there are, 60 half, broken pencils. And I realize, oh, actually, I do love a mechanical pencil. I'm going to get rid of that for this. So it's just all based in facts and reality, where it keeps my brain from spinning out, right? Because that was me. I saw the value in everything, every broken pencil, every broken crayon, I'm like, well, I could do something with that, So
Yes.
that was what had gotten me into that situation, is that I saw the value in things. I saw what could be done, but then I had so much stuff that I wasn't doing any of the stuff, right? Because it was overwhelming and I didn't have the space to do it. So
Yeah, absolutely. And so how do you get started decluttering when you're just completely overwhelmed?
yeah, you acknowledge that every bit of progress is progress. Okay. The goal here is to have less in the space when I stop than I did when I started. And I'm going to count that as decluttering success. And so we start with the trash, meaning trash or recycling, either one. Okay. But I say trash because for a lot of people, recycling and this idealistic idea of what they're going to do with the stuff is the thing that makes it just sit in their house. Right. And so if you have an established recycling routine, then use that. Right. But I'm going to say trash because if you don't have an established recycling routine, you need to stick it in the trash, right? And I'm saying this for myself, right? Like I know this because this is what I had to get through too. So you grab a black trash bag or whatever you have, but ideally it's a black trash bag because then you can't see what you just put inside of it and the people in your house can't see what you just put inside of it, right? So you just start throwing away trash in the most visible space in your house. Okay. This is the space that guests would see, that your family's going to see, because it's so tempting to be like, I'm going to declutter. I'm going to go to that bizarre little cabinet back there in the back of the house. And if you work all day on that and you're really proud of what you've done, but the people in your house are like, we don't see any difference, or the doorbell rings and you're still embarrassed to open it, it will drain all that decluttering energy. But if you work in a visible space, you're going to see it, your family's going to see it, and you're going to increase your decluttering energy and keep you going. So we just throw away trash. And we like, the thing about throwing away trash is there's always trash, right? Like there are people who are like, I can't believe she says throw away trash. I mean, who has trash? Why don't they just throw it? There's always trash,
Yeah.
right? Even if you're convinced that you are the one who doesn't have any trash, and you very well may be, right? I don't know your house, but you do have trash. But
We do.
even if you are convinced you don't, you still look for trash because there is no emotion needed to look for trash. You are not making any decisions. It is literally the easiest of the easy stuff. So look for trash, if only to prove there's no trash. And it gives you that way to get started. And getting started is the hardest part, right? Is that decluttering paralysis that a lot of us have felt when we just feel like we can't even move. We can't. So just look for trash. It's permission to do that. And as you're doing that, you're no longer looking at it as a pile or a mass of stuff. You are looking at individual items as you look for trash. And now, because you've looked at individual items, your brain is starting to adjust to what's actually in this space. So then you're more ready to move to the next step, where when you're just thinking, this is a big pile of stuff, I know there's important stuff in there, or there's stuff that's going to rip my heart out to have to make a decision about. It feels like it's an entire pile of overwhelming stuff, right? But when you're looking for trash and you look at individual items, your brain realizes, oh, it's not all overwhelming. Like it just starts to adjust, and then you're ready to keep moving on from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you make such a good point about the recycling thing,
Yeah.
because I'm a nurse and I was just working the other day, and the amount of waste is like, people have no idea how much waste goes into healthcare. And it's like, yes, sometimes, I mean, as far as like how things in a perfect world, yes, everything that went to the recycling got recycled, but not everything does. And yes, there are times where we have to just say, like, put it in the garbage.
Well,
And yeah, go on.
yeah, the reality is that most people who struggle with clutter are idealists, right? I'm not saying not all idealists struggle with clutter, but most people who struggle with clutter are idealists, right? And we want to do the right thing. We want to do the very best thing in the very best way, hence all the stuff, right? And hence all the not getting rid of the stuff, because I'm like, oh, but I gotta do that. And I gotta, before I can do that, I gotta figure out how to do that. And I gotta figure out what the very best way is, and so then it becomes overwhelming and we're stuck. Where if you will go ahead and get it out in the less than ideal way, but the most accessible, easy to do way for you, then you get your house down below your clutter threshold, which is one of those words I made up, which is the point at which you personally can keep your house under control easily. Okay. So it's the point that you can handle your house. And once you get your house under that, then it's amazing how your bandwidth increases. And then you can do the more easy, the more idealistic thing, right? Like maybe you have to drive your cardboard 6 miles away to a place that recycles cardboard. Well, the ability to do that is going to be, it's going to be so much easier for you once you have gotten your house under control. So you may have to throw away to get it to that point where then you can do the things that you really want to do. But as long as you're just stuck because it's all too overwhelming, that's the bad situation that we end up in.
Yeah, and then people end up living with clutter around them in their one and only life. Like, we
Yes.
live once, and like, what do you feel like is sort of like the biggest, what bothers you the most about people living with clutter? And not in a like, I think you should do this and this and this in life, but what kind of breaks your heart with regards to it?
Well, I just want to be clear. This will always be a struggle for me, right? Like I'm not a minimalist, right? Like I'm just let me get it down to where I can handle it. That's where I can focus. So I'll just tell you, like, it's not what other people think. Like a lot of times we're like, I don't know how someone lives like that, or I don't know how someone can do that, because, like, oh, well, you have to get your space cleared out to be able to think. And I'm like, actually, the problem is that a lot of us who struggle with clutter, it's because we totally can think in the midst of it, right? Like we don't have to do that first to be able to zero in. So we generally have superpowers to be able to hyper focus on something, which is what lets everything, get away. I think the thing that I so passionately want people to understand, which was what surprised me so much, was how much I was better able to do the things I was wanting to do when I brought all that clutter in. I could actually do those things when I let go of the things that didn't fit in my space, right? Like, so I had brought all these things in for the crafty and creative and, idealistic person I wanted to be, but because there was so much, I couldn't actually be that person. And so it was like the letting go of the majority of that stuff, not all of it, but letting go of so much of it to where it only fit in the actual space that I really truly had in my home available, giving priority space to actually being able to do the thing, like, open table space around it to where I could do these things. Then I actually was able to become the person who I was envisioning becoming as I brought those things in. So it's this, it's that catch-22, right? Like you're bringing the stuff in for who you want to be, but then it ends up keeping you from being the person you want to be.
Yeah, I think that, and you make such a good point, because I speak to a lot of people who have ADHD. In our house, 4 out of 5 of us have it.
Yep.
And yeah, like we can function fine with clutter, but then it's that point where you turn around and you're like, oh, and as the mom and the wife or whatever, I can't help but be more affected by it. And then I feel bad about myself.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you make such a good point, like the idealistic, like, oh, I've got these craft supplies and I'm going to start doing macrame and I got all this. And it's just like, like this is holding me back. So what can go so that I have space to even do that? Because like, sure, like do that, but you need to make space for that.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. So I had a few questions from my community come in for you, and a big one, and this one is near and dear to my heart because I have 3 teenage boys, although one is off at college, but he's coming back in a couple months, and my husband and I are like, oh my gosh, because he's the messy one. He's the mess, like really messy.
He's probably also the most fun one, I'm just saying.
Yeah, it's, you know what? Yeah. You might be right.
I am right.
So what are your tips for navigating teen bedrooms? So this person says, like, they're not full on adults, right? But they're not little kids anymore. When they're little kids, I find it was so much easier. So this person says, like, I'm not cleaning their room, but I want to help them keep a clean space. And also, like, what's with the smells?
It's just reality. I mean, like, kiss those baby toes while they're baby toes, because once they're hairy, no. I just want to be clear. I don't give parenting advice. Like I have, young adult and teenage kids, and so I know better than to give parenting advice, right?
Totally.
What's that? There's that meme that says, as soon as I say my kid would never, here he comes nevering like he's nevered before. It's like,
that's a good one.
Yeah, I know, it's my favorite. So I don't give parenting advice, but the reality is that every individual has a clutter threshold. And we mentioned that before. It's the point at which you personally can keep your space under control, right? And if a space is hard to keep under control, it has too much stuff. That is just the fact. And I had to realize this was a big part of my own realization, was that my mother has a very high clutter threshold. And the clutter threshold is not your preference for amount of stuff. It's what you can keep under control, right? So she could have a lot of stuff and keep everything neatly put away. She could, know that the thing that she needed was at the back of the cabinet and move 15 things, get the thing that she needed and move the 15 things back. And that's her personality. That's how she functions. I grew up thinking I needed to have all this stuff, but I didn't have a high clutter threshold. I have a very low clutter threshold, meaning I can't handle that stuff. As much as I wish I could have it, as much as I want it, I can't handle it. And so the only way for me to have a space that's under control and that stays under control is to have less stuff. So acknowledging that their space, if it's consistently out of control, clutter is the issue. And they maybe don't care, maybe don't want your help, whatever, but going in with the 5-step process. So I have my 5-step process. Are you okay if I give my how
Please
to get the
do.
printable? Okay.
Yes.
So you can go to aslobcomesclean.com/5, FIVE. And with my newsletter, it's free newsletter, you can get the 5-step process printed out. It's also in Decluttering at the Speed of Life, my book too. And I have lots of videos and all that. It's everywhere on the internet. But going through that process, I often recommend you have the actual printed paper in front of you, because that makes it, I'm not saying this lady on the internet said this, like it's the process, right? There's something about knowing there's a process, and the process works extremely well with other people because there are no emotions in it. And we're not assessing the value of items. He says it's important and you say that's dumb or whatever. We don't do that. We literally go with the reality of the situation, and you say, okay, let's look for trash, and bite your tongue when he says, okay, this is trash. And then you're like, that's trash. Like, oh my word, how do you not see that's trash? We're not going to do that. We say, okay, let's move to the next step. So you don't see any other trash in here. Okay. All right, let's move to the next step, because you're also gaining some trust there, right? Like you're going through this process, and then what in here is easy. And then we will get to every last thing as we maybe pick up the packaging from the socks, the sock bag. And you say, okay, he didn't see it as trash, but if you needed this packaging for socks, where would you look for it first? And then usually that will register, oh, that's trash, right? But we do this because we're respecting because they're adults now and they've got their own ideas, right? And they're sometimes wanting those ideas to be different from your ideas, right? Like maybe anyway, you know how it is, right? You have adult kids, so we all know, right? but so it's acknowledging that, but it's leading them through the process. And then, the last step of the process is to acknowledge the reality of the space that you have. So if we've gotten to the point where all socks are in the sock drawer, but the sock drawer is overflowing and won't even close, okay, we're not going to be like, why do you have so many socks? We never ask the question why. Like that is not helpful, even though it's the most tempting question to ask, because we often want to know, why do you care about this stuff? Why? We're not going to ask that question, right? It's not part of the process. But we say, okay, your sock drawer doesn't close. Your sock drawer is a container. It is a limit. Okay. It is meant to serve as a boundary. And let's just get rid of your least favorite socks until the sock drawer will close. Well, there's something about that I'm not saying when's the last time you wore these, right? We're not doing that. Instead, we're just saying, okay, what's your least favorite pair? It acknowledges that they're all favorites, right? Like I'm not having to reject an item, which tends to be very difficult for a lot of people, a lot of younger people, especially, well, all of us, right? I'm not having to reject it. I'm just saying, which one is your least favorite? Okay, that will have to go. Wish you could keep it. But the reality is that the size of the sock drawer is the size of the sock drawer, right? That's the container concept, right? So that just going through that process and, casually mentioning without judgment that our goal is to declutter this to the point where it's easy for you to maintain, where 5 minutes will get it back under control. That's the 5-minute pickup. That's the measurement for whether or not you're under your clutter threshold. You don't have to use all these terms with them, but just, as you're working, so our goal here is that we get it down to the point where, on a regular day, 5 minutes will get it back under control, okay. And just mentioning that as you go, and then it starts to help them realize, okay, well, actually, if this thing was gone, that would make it just a little easier to get it back under control quickly, so that is, but I'm also not saying it's easy, right? It's not easy. It's not fun. It's not easy, but because it's an emotion-free, judgment-free process, it works really well when you're guiding other people through that.
Oh my gosh. I
And then
love that.
close the door.
And then close the door. Yep.
Yeah.
So true. Yeah, teenagers, I tell you. That is very good. I absolutely love that. I think that's really good advice for all kids ages, but especially the teenagers.
Yeah. Well, and isn't that what teenagers want, is respect, right? Like, they want to be treated as having their own ideas and their own thoughts and their own all that. And so this process allows for that, while also acknowledging the realities of the space, like guiding them through accepting the reality of their space and their clutter threshold and all that.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I have another one here, and I'm not sure. Okay, so it says, how can I help my kids, all of whom are neurodivergent, tackle their mess? My 9-year-old has really severe ADHD and just can't.
Yeah.
Even when I help her, it's tears and breakdown because she's so overwhelmed. I follow Dana's steps, starting with picking up garbage, but even that causes issues because everything is her favorite.
Yeah.
I dread introducing the container concept. And I think your answer before is helpful too.
Yeah. I mean, it's really the same answer. The other thing too is, don't forget what we said at the beginning of that, which is she gets to identify garbage.
Yeah.
And you moving on to the next step, instead of arguing pieces of garbage or pointing out garbage, it is painful as the mom. But because we're going to get all the way through the process, let's say we get to the very end, and you have picked up actual garbage and said, where would you look for this first? And she said, I would look for it in that bucket over there with my Barbies. Okay. So you take the garbage there now, take it there now, and you just say, okay, so which Barbie are you going to get rid of so that we have room for this garbage? Like we play the whole thing out and let them make that decision, and it will generally help. And here's the thing. I have been diagnosed by many people on the internet with ADHD, but I've never actually been diagnosed. And I don't know, it never affected me in school. So I don't, it wasn't something I needed to be diagnosed with at that point.
Yeah.
But when I laid it out in Decluttering the Speed of Life and really started teaching this process, I started hearing from people saying, thank you so much for your process. It works so well for me because I have ADHD. Okay. So that, and I've now worked with therapists and other experts and things. It works well for ADHD, even though it feels like it wouldn't. So like the key is take it there now, right? Like that's how we make the final decision and act on the final decision. Instead of making piles for later, we go and we take the thing there now. And it feels like, oh, but if I do that, I'll get distracted. And yet when I have done a survey of, people who have ADHD, have been actually diagnosed and follow the process, I asked what's the number one game changer strategy for you that works well for you because you have ADHD? They all said, take it there now is the thing, because it's not setting it aside to do later, because then that's something weighing on my mind, right? It's something I haven't finished. I take it there now, and that acknowledges the fact that I am distractible, but that thing is in its final home. And when I get distracted, I don't have 5 other things that I was supposed to have done before I could finish. Right. And so it is the thing. So really following that. And then this container concept, remember that she's already familiar with my methods, I can tell. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you don't explain the container concept. We're not going to explain to her this before. We say, I have a new bucket that I got for your Barbies. Okay. We're going to put your Barbies in there. Put your favorite ones in there first. And then whatever doesn't fit, that's what we'll have to get rid of. But yeah, put your favorite ones in there first. That's fun. And I hear from people all the time who are like, I was convinced it wouldn't work with my kids. I can't believe how well it works, because you're saying, I am not going to argue with you over this Barbie has been drawn on, or this Barbie's hair looks terrible, or you cut this Barbie's hair, or this Barbie, whatever. Instead, is saying whatever you like, great, it's yours, right? But we can't keep it all and it stay under control. We don't have to say all this. We just say, here's a space. I'm acknowledging that you have stuff you love. And that action of putting things in there, putting her favorite ones in there first, it strangely just naturally sorts out the things that aren't as favorite. And it is, I think that the hesitation people have is this idea that the container concept means I'm going to fill the container completely and then have to make decisions about what needs to go when I have something else that needs to fit in the container, right? And in reality, just knowing that there's a limit before you get started makes everything look different. And it's very rare that you fill the container completely and then start making decisions. Generally, it's like, okay, what deserves space in the container? Let's put our favorite ones in first. Okay, and then it's not even full and you're done, right? Because you've already just naturally sorted those things out without the emotions of that. So I just encourage you to try the process. Try the process from the beginning, knowing that we're never going to ask why, and we're never, we're going to let these be her decisions. What is trash is up to her. Okay. We will actually ask the questions about the trash if we need to when we get there.
That's good. And I have a friend, she's a relationship coach, and asking why is never really helpful in anything. It's just like, no.
Yeah, I train decluttering coaches, and that is my number one thing is we don't ask why.
Yeah.
You want to know so badly why, but it just makes people hold on to their stuff, because it's like, well, if you're asking me why, especially if I can't really verbalize why, I'm not sure why, but clearly you don't understand me. You can't help me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, that's good. I have another person who's a teacher. I'm sure you talk to a lot of teachers too. They have so much stuff and it means so much to them, but how can they purge teacher paper files? They want to go digital. What would you say to them?
So it's the same process with anything, and that is start with the trash, and that is the lowest commitment, lowest angst thing that you can do. It's decision free. So give yourself permission to take a handful of papers and say, I'm just going to look through it and look for trash. If there happens to be any trash, surely there's not, right? There's always trash. I'm going to look through it. And if there's any trash, I'm going to stick that in trash or recycling. Okay. And generally doing that, you'll realize, oh, it went from this to this, right? This is a lot less overwhelming than this. And now my brain knows what I'm dealing with, right? Where before it was just, there's a lot of paper and they're all important. So really trying to eliminate first and go through the easy stuff. Like I'm going to go back through the same stack and I'm gonna be like, is there anything that, I obviously already know what to do with this. I already have a place for it. Okay. And then I deal with that going through. It could go from this to this, right? So it just makes it a little bit less, so that by the time you're doing the thing of, I'm going to digitize these papers, I'm going to scan them, whatever, you're not just saying, I'm going to scan all my papers. You've gotten it down to what it actually needs to be. And it's a lot less overwhelming than it was before. And then you start through the process of scanning. And starting through the process of scanning will often make you realize, oh yeah, actually, 3/4 of the things that I initially on the first 2 passes through thought were so important, actually, I don't want to spend my time scanning those. And then it just makes it easier. Those things turn into obvious trash, but so many times it's this dauntingness of, okay, I'm going to scan. But if you will take, go through it for trash, go through it for easy stuff, and then go through it and say, okay, I'm going to take this stack of 10 pieces of paper and I'm going to start on the scanning process. That experience will really help you get rid of even more.
Oh yeah, I like that part. You point that out. I'm like, yeah. I mean, I don't really scan much, but that would be enough for me.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so another thing is for people who have the health challenges and energy issues. What advice would you have for them for how to tackle it? Because they're worried that going
Mhm.
slowly at the pace they feel like going is going to just take years.
Uh, that is, again, the beauty of the no mess method, right? Is that you can go slowly and make real, actual progress. We're not going slowly as in we're pulling everything out and then I have to live for 3 months while I do a little bit, a little bit. No, I'm dealing with one item at a time, and I'm really doing that. And the beauty of the take it there now, the beauty of the no mess process is you can stop at any time and you will have only made progress. You can stop because your energy just left you. You can stop because you just want to. You can stop because life happens and you didn't mean to stop, but then, oh, wait, I just got distracted from that, you know? And so again, I I don't want to be the person who's like, "Oh, you can do it." I'm just saying that I get emails all the time from people who say the no mess process works for me because I have physical energy limitations or mobility limitations. And so the other thing to remember, I did a session with somebody. It's on YouTube a couple months ago, and she was in this situation. She had the physical limitation. She had no energy to get up and move around, and so we only did what she could do while she was sitting there. But everything we did completely, right? So we just kept looking for trash. We just kept looking for the things that she could put away in their final home without getting up from the table and moving around. Okay. So we just did that and she made huge progress. And it's that change in mentality from if what's the point of starting if I'm not going to finish? Oh, there's a big point in starting. Like it's going to make it so much better. And you can make so much progress without having to move around. But even if you do get up and take something to the place where you would look for it first, you can just be done at that point and then you make real actual progress. And I hear from a lot of people who just say that the value of taking it there now and like it no longer being a thing to be done, it's already finished and it's completed. The value of going ahead and taking it there now, even though, yes, I had to use up my physical energy to do that, the benefit of that is incredible because it's done, it's finished. I don't have to think about it. I completed small things, and completing small things slowly is so much more effective than half doing lots of things and then running out of energy.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Well, this has been so great, Dana. Okay, so you are you have so many amazing things to offer. Where can people find you?
So my website is called a slobcomesclean.com. Yeah. um, Remember, it was anonymous in the beginning. Did I say that before? uh,
No. Was
yeah, it
it?
was. Yeah, it was totally anonymous for several years because it was my embarrassing secret. And I didn't intend for
Right.
this to be the thing I was going to talk about. Um,
I
but
get it.
yeah, so it's a slobcomesclean.com and you can get my books there. They're available wherever books are sold. You can also just Google Dana K. White. Don't put Dana White because that's the guy who runs the Ultimate Fighting Championship.
Oh.
Yes, but if you put the K in there, you will find me and find me, wherever you like to get books, Audible, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, local bookstore, all those places. So
Oh my gosh. Well,
yeah,
thank you
thank you.
so much for being here
Thank you.
and looking forward to chatting again soon.